Growing up without a father, I felt incomplete. I felt incomplete as a man, as a young man, in the things that I was able to do and don't do. And so I had to get that completion from people who was like father figures, but it's never the feeling of, this is my father, it was like, okay, this person is trying to be my father, but they can never take the place of who my father is. I remember at 6, 7 years old, I picked up a phone book one day and it had the South Carolina pages in there, and I looked at for every Sam Johnson that was from Orangeburg in that phone book, and I called every single number. And I would say something in the lines of, when they answered the phone, "Are you my dad?" And I was explaining that, and I remember feeling so hopeless again. And so nobody knew, but many nights I would cry to myself because a lot of different nights I would cry to myself and be like, where my dad at? I struggled a long time. I went from job to job, girlfriend to girlfriend, all this stuff, that wasn't giving me any peace in my life. Beginning of 2017 to ending of 2016, my then fiance, Diana, she always wanted to go to Charleston. And so most of my family is from South Carolina, from the Roseville, Orangeburg area. So a week or so before going, I talked to my mom about the plans that we had. And my mother said, you should go, see if you can find your father. And I was like, Mom, I'm really not with that. I'm kind of past that. I got a relationship with God. You're doing well now. Saturday morning, my mom, right before I left out the house, she come to me with a piece of notebook paper that she had ripped with 2 addresses on it. And she said, well, these are 2 addresses I found on white pages online. This for your dad. I said, Mom, I'm not going to probably not going to even go. So she said, okay, well, I love you. Enjoy your trip. So I remember balling up that paper and putting it in my pocket. Me and my wife, who was on our way. Orangeburg is where my father was suspectedly living. And so we reached Orangeburg, and I told my wife, well, I might well go check one of these addresses. So I chose Crawford Street. It was one of the addresses on there. So we drive to Crawford Street. We pull up to the address. We look over to the side, and the trailer, double wide trailer, had been boarded up, and the mailbox had a lock on it. So immediately it started pouring down raining. I got out the car and I went over to the neighbor's house, which was across the street, and I knocked on the door. Man came to the door and I said, hey, do you know Sam Johnson? I said, sorry to bother you, but do you know Sam Johnson? He said, yeah, I know Sam. And he said, but I haven't seen Sam in, 2 or 3 years, but he used to stay over there across the street with his brother-in-law. So I remember getting back in the car and I just started pouring down crying again, because I'm like, man, I done did all this, and my mom is so heavy on me about trying to find my father, and I'm just tired of it, I remember, being that little 6-year-old looking through the phone book, calling every Sam Johnson in there to see if that was my father, and it wasn't. I felt so hopeless, and I wanted to just give up on all of that, because I felt like it was hurting me more than it was helping me. And so my wife, she reached over, she wiped the tears off my cheek. She said, well, let's go get something to eat. It's gonna be okay. Let's go get something to eat. And so I stopped eating and I started praying. And I said, God, all my life I always wanted my father. What should I do from here? I know that you're in my life now. So whatever you tell me, just please give me peace in this situation. So it seemed like he whispered to my soul, write a letter to your father. Go back to that locked mailbox and put that letter on top of that mailbox. So I'm like, is that me just, thinking something crazy, or this really God? So I told Diana, my wife, I said, this is what God told me to do. And she said, well, let's go do it. And I'm looking at her, I was like, okay. So, but it's good to have a godly woman. But anyway, we went to Crawford Street. We pulled up in front of that address. It's still pouring down raining. I open the glove compartment. I get a piece of paper. I started writing. The first line that I write is, Dad, I forgive you. That's the first line I write, Dad, I forgive you. I love you. You got grandkids want to meet you. I want to meet my brothers and sisters that I never met. And I just want to let you know that we don't ever have to talk about anything from the past. I just want to be able to have a future with you. Love, Seth. Put my name, put my number down, flipped it, and put it on top of that mailbox. Now remember, rain is pouring down. Normally you'll think, why would I put something, with ink and a regular piece of paper out on that's gonna be penetrated by rain and probably eventually tear up? Well, I'm doing what God told me to do, and I trust in the Lord at this time. And 2 or 3 days later, I get this call from a South Carolina number. Bam! Guess who it is? My father. My hero. Somebody that I love, even though he wasn't in my life. I remember him saying he got a very charming voice. Seth, how you doing? I want to get to see you. I want to get to know you, and found your letter. Well, I graduated the end of 2017, December 16th on a Saturday, and guess who was there? My father was there, my sister that I have not ever met, but I heard so much about, my niece and nephew, my brother-in-law. My graduation was the most beautiful thing I ever seen in my life, because everything that I had wanted, and knowing that I listened to what the Lord told me, he granted me everything that I had ever prayed for. So now, me and my father, he calls me almost every other day, especially with the pandemic going on. He calls, he say, hey, make sure you being careful. I'm not going nowhere. You know what I'm saying? He's 74 years old. My dad is 74 years old. And he called me, I think, day before yesterday, and he said, all right, there's police stuff going on, this is him. And he said, make sure you be careful, make sure you be respectful. Officer stops you. I say, yeah, I know, Dad. Okay, but I'm listening to him. I'm letting him have his time because he's just worried about me. So that's the reason my faith is so strong, and I hope that my story can help other people who may struggle with relationships or voids in their life to know that they must depend on the Lord by serving Him and listening to what He said. So now I work for Carolina Youth and Development as a residential manager. So I'm seeing a lot of fatherless kids and motherless kids, and just missing compartments to what they need to be in, and I try to give them hope through my testimony and through what I have been through.